Thank you, John. So these are the kinds of images that are out there to represent our subconscious mind. And just as many of us are now in parts of the country covered by snow and ice, I know there have been some horrific stories in the past few days. Keep in mind that tonight, with the help of our panelists, we're going to uncover and tap into that vast piece of the iceberg that lies beneath the surface. So I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Ron Anbar, who is our first panelist this evening, but just a little Zoom etiquette. Since we're not a webinar, if you could please, I guess that anyone who's not presenting, which is everyone but Ron and me for a few seconds here, if you could please mute your mics. Okay. And also at some point, if you could put in the chat the number 21, because that'll give us a simple way to take attendance to see everyone who's been able to join us this evening. Thank you. Wow, it looks like a lot of you are just doing that automatically already. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce a respected colleague, mentor, prolific writer, to say the least, in hypnosis, Ron Anbar, MD. And Ron he's board certified in both pediatric pulmonology and general pediatrics. And he provides hypnosis, also counseling services at Center Point Medicine in La Jolla. Did I say it right, Ron?
Yep.
Jolla?
Yep.
California, and it's got that little Jolla in it. And also Syracuse, New York. Ron is, as some of you might already know, past president, fellow, and approved consultant of the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. And it's pretty amazing. Over the last quarter of a century, he has successfully treated over 7,000 children. That's pretty mind-boggling. And on top of that, in his spare time, he's authored more than 50 articles, abstracts, book chapters on pediatric functional disorders and pediatric hypnosis. And also he's worked as a guest editor and advisory editor for the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis. And most recently, I'm just thrilled to share, some of you may already know this or have seen this book out there. Ron is the author of a new book called Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis, A Journey to the Center. I made sure to get myself a copy as soon as it was off the press. So just wanted to show you this book. I'm not done yet, but got through the first 3 or 4 chapters. And if you're working with children, it is an essential addition to your library. Also, last October, Ron began blogging regularly for the Psychology Today online regarding the topic of understanding hypnosis. So you can find many of his writings there as well. And his presentation for tonight is aptly titled Conversations with the Subconscious. So Ron, please take it away.
Great. So do I have control? I can share now something, hopefully. We'll find out. Yes. Okay. Start the slideshow, God willing. All right. So indeed, I'm going to talk to you about conversation with the subconscious, and I will put a plug in for the book now and later. The chapters 11 through 16 of the book go into great detail about what we're talking tonight. I hold conversations with the subconscious with most of my pediatric patients who are maybe older than 7 or 8. And when they're 8 or 9 years old, I'll call it inner advisor. By the time they're teenagers, I'll explain the subconscious as we're going to get into. And I routinely, with the patient's help, because it's their subconscious, design their therapy based on what they have to tell me. And I think this is a very much underutilized tool in hypnosis. So I think it was 14 months ago, or 13 months ago, I spoke too high, and I showed muscle testing as a way of interact with the subconscious. But today we want to go a step further. We want to show you how you can actually converse with subconscious. And we're going to demonstrate this in this presentation with a couple of people in the audience who don't know who they are yet. And then in your small groups, you can do the same thing. And whether you're interacting with the subconscious or with the high self, many of, as Dr. Carey will discuss later, the approach can be certainly overlap. So to review what I actually talked about 13 months ago, what is the subconscious? And I define it to the patients as part of your mind you're not usually aware of. Therefore, it's below conscious awareness. We're not getting into unconscious and subconscious, preconscious, all that. The patients don't need to know all that. I tell the patients it's a storehouse of thoughts and feelings that you might not know exist. And I suggest it can serve as a guide for personal growth or therapy. Now, mind you, these are suggestions. So it's quite likely that the results I get from the patient's subconscious have to do in part with the suggestions how I set this up. Although I'll tell you that I developed these ideas based on experiences with early patients in my career, and I didn't have these biases to start with. So when you want to converse with the subconscious, there are many different ways of doing it. There's the classic idiomotor signaling of moving your fingers. Professor Dabney Ewan used to demonstrate that quite regularly. You can interact through muscle testing, and I believe Dr. Carey will be speaking about that later. You can have the subconscious handwrite answers to questions. You can have the subconscious type answers on a computer keyboard in a word processing program. You can have the subconscious, you have the patient imagine a whiteboard or a computer screen and have the subconscious write on the whiteboard or type on the computer screen as a way of responding. I learned that actually from Ed Yeager, Dr. Ed Yeager, who some of you knew, and he passed unfortunately a couple of years ago. You can also talk to the subconscious through an inner advisor. You can have the subconscious speak verbally to you, so that would be like automatic talking. In fact, I'm starting to teach patients to talk to their own subconscious, so you can have the patient record. They can actually alternate between subconscious answers and conscious questions, and they'll talk to each other verbally and they record it. It's an interesting way of just starting to play with that method. You can also have the subconscious give answers silently within the mind. So there's all sorts of different ways. Questions will arise. Well, how do you know it's really subconscious with some of these methods? And from a practical standpoint, it doesn't really matter. If you get clinically useful material, that's cool. I believe a lot of this does yield subconscious information because the patients express surprise at knowing it, and sometimes even come up with things that I don't think they knew that they would have access to without interacting with their subconscious. So when you're talking to the subconscious, and in the 2 or 3 minutes we're going to go into this and practice this as a group, you want to keep in mind how to ask the questions so you get useful material. And one of the first things I will ask is, are you willing to help the patient? Or if you're teaching the patient to talk to their own subconscious, are you willing to help me? And then a nice general question would be, can you please give the patient or the subject or myself some helpful advice? And if it says yes, since the subconscious tends to be concrete, you might need to then say, go ahead and give the advice. So that's how you can start a conversation. Then depending on the answers you get, you ask follow-up questions. And as you'll see when we demonstrate this, there's no telling where it's going to go. So you have to go with the flow, and it's fun. And if you're not sure what to ask, one of the greatest things when you're talking to the subconscious is you can take a pause for 2 or 3 minutes and think about it, and the patient doesn't care because they're in trance. So just some guides. The subconscious responses tend to be concrete. The subconscious tends not to volunteer information. Although in my experience, and I've done this with thousands of kids, if it does on rare occasions volunteer information, it's usually something big is going on. In the Bible, there's a quote in Hebrew, it's Hineni. It's like, here I am. God calls somebody, says, here I am. And whenever somebody, character in the Bible says, here I am, something big's going to happen. So if the subconscious volunteers information, perk up your ears, something big may happen. Subconscious may choose to withhold information, even lie about it if you press too hard. And the reason it might withhold is the subject or patient may not be ready to hear it. It may think the patient should be able to solve it for themselves. It tends to be vague about the future. I think it tends to be vague because, like, if the subconscious said, for example, well, you'll be a millionaire by the time you're 35, it might say, well, I don't have to work anymore. I'll just quit. And then, of course, the future will change. So future-oriented questions, I tend to discourage my patients from asking. And when they do ask, it's usually kind of vague. What can you use the subconscious for? For therapists in the audience that can help with psychotherapy, I will routinely ask the patient subconscious, do you think if I did this with a patient would be helpful? And if they say yes, then I'll tell the patient, let's do this. To say no, I just leave it alone. So I can actually test questions I might want to ask the patients in a conscious state. Even if the patient hears it consciously, it's like kind of neutralized. So there, sometimes we talk to patients, we're not sure we should go in a certain direction. It's really great to be able to say, run it by part of the patient, and the patient can say, hey, yeah, that's a fine thing to talk about. You can use the subconscious to help with health issues, and moving away from therapy. You can have the subconscious give you creative advice for your artwork, for the book you're writing, career advice, and help with academic or athletic achievements. So there's lots of stuff the subconscious can pitch in on. So this is my last slide. Here's a couple references. I want to plug my book yet again. Again, I talk a lot about how I developed the subconscious work and give plenty of examples of it. And the reason I really want to tell you about the book is this book is not for you. It's for the general public. I think all of you hopefully will gain something from reading it, but I ask you to think about getting this book, read it. If you think I'm correct, that it's a good representation of what hypnosis can be, suggest it to your patients, suggest it to people who are curious about hypnosis. I try to write it in a very easy to read way, so it's accessible to the public. And my hope is it'll help bring us all more patients and be able to bring hypnosis to the forefront of medical care where it belongs. Okay, so that's the end of the slides. At this point, we're going to do an exercise with a couple of volunteers from the audience. And when you do the small groups a little bit later, you can repeat this kind of thing. So what I need is somebody out there to volunteer who is pretty good at hypnosis. So, you're hypnotizable individuals. Just because we're doing it on Zoom and because we don't have much time to do inductions and stuff. So if a high hypnotizable individual is willing to volunteer to be the subject, and then I need a second volunteer who will question the subject's subconscious. So if you are willing to volunteer as the subject, could you please unmute yourself and say, here I am?
Here I am.
Okay, who's speaking?
Anbar.
Okay, so Anne, okay, so great. And we need one more person who wants to be the facilitator. So say, here you are, here I am. Don't all jump at once.
I got the easy part.
Yeah. And in the small groups, by the way, there'll be one subject, and then the other three or four in the group can be the facilitators. Just don't step on each other's toes. So please, somebody step up who's willing to, who's kind of extroverted, Very shy group. No, I'm not going to do the facilitator. I know how to do this already. So
I'm volunteering to be facilitator.
who is that? Who's that?
My name is Vanetta.
Okay, Vanetta. Great. Hi.
Hi.
Perfect. All right. So in this exercise, so the group can decide the subject can decide how they want to respond. Perhaps we'll use the whiteboard method just to show. So, and what you can do is, if you could please, now, by the way, there's no formal induction here, especially if you have a good hypnotic subject. So just saying, imagine a whiteboard, that's the induction. So, And if you could imagine a whiteboard, and your job is to say whatever you see on the whiteboard. Don't say what you think should be on the whiteboard, just say whatever appears.
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
I imagine a whiteboard, and whatever I see on the whiteboard.
You report.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
And so go ahead and imagine a whiteboard and let us know when you see it.
Okay.
So Vanetta, I'm going to let you take the reins. So you might want to start by just asking, may I talk to, may I talk to Anne's subconscious through the whiteboard? Please answer yes or no, and then Anne will let you know what it says. So go ahead, Vanetta.
Okay. May I talk to Anne's subconscious through the whiteboard? May I talk to Anne's subconscious through the whiteboard?
Yes.
Okay. And does Anne have any questions for the subconscious?
So before you do that, you might ask, may I ask you some questions? Always ask permission, because they could say no, so the way there are people in our society who talk about having a lot of abreactions and difficult situations. I don't find that happening I don't really find that happening. And I think in part because I always ask permission. So before asking any other questions, ask, is it okay if I ask you questions?
Is it okay if I ask you questions?
Yes.
Okay. And is there anything that Anne should know that might help her with something that she's been looking for answers?
So I'm going to pause there. So it's a very general question. You expect the answer will be yes, but you're going to still be stuck. So you might want to reformulate the question in a way that you're going to get a useful answer.
Mhm.
So like, is there anything that Anne should learn tonight, or anything Anne should know right now? Or do you have any advice at this moment? Because if you say, is there anything, it's going to say yes, and you won't be further along.
Yes. Is there anything that Anne should know, should learn tonight from this conversation with the subconscious?
The white the whiteboard is it might be better to do something else besides the whiteboard. It's not working.
Sure. So, any suggestions of a different way that might be easier to communicate with the subconscious?
Maybe just talking.
Sure. Absolutely. So
Vanetta, she suggested talking, so ask, may I talk to the subconscious with Anne's voice? And now notice it's third person, so it's dissociative.
yeah, may I have permission to talk to the subconscious?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any questions that I may ask on Anne's behalf?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the question? Or the area that it pertains to?
How to be more confident in offering hypnosis.
Mhm. So a question to the subconscious. Any suggestions of how I can become more comfortable in offering hypnosis? How Anne can become more comfortable in offering hypnosis?
Maybe just dance.
Maybe. Mhm.
Don't take it so seriously.
Mhm. So a question for,
So I have to interrupt because we have to finish now. So you see, it takes time, which is okay, and you'll have time in the small groups. So how will you finish, Benetta? What will you say?
I was going to ask another question if the subconscious can offer any visual or auditory information to present to Anne in the privacy of her own mind, that she can continue to interpret and
Okay,
and
good.
playful.
So again, and I'm being rude and cutting off because I don't want to step on Dr. Carrier. So that's a great question, but you might say the subconscious heard this, and we very much appreciate that it was willing to speak to us through Anne. And when Anne is ready, if she can come back here, that would be awesome.
Okay. So yeah, thank you to the subconscious for participating in the conversation, and now inviting Anne to join us back in the present moment. And thank you very much for volunteering, and for yeah, definitely requires courage, and you made that first step into in that direction of practicing your skills in front of probably hundreds of people. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. In the small groups, you might want to talk about the inner experience. And I want to tell you, if you like this, at the ASH annual meeting, we're going to have a 3-hour session doing just this. So there'll be lots of more time to do this. So if you're interested, please join my presentation at ASH. It'll be on Saturday, the first Saturday in March. Thank you so very much. I hope this was helpful.
thank you.
Thank you, Benetta. And yes, that was great.
Gosh, yes. Benetta, Anne, thank you for stepping up. Anne, talk about hypnotizability. You just got into that in seconds, and that confidence that you summoned to volunteer, may that continue to go with you. That was amazing. And Benetta, great job. Same thing. You know, out of 70 people, you're the one who spoke up and said, I'll do it. That says something, Benetta. Really appreciate that. And Ron, absolutely beautiful. I just loved how you gave us some helpful guidelines on how we can ask questions of the subconscious. It's not easy. It's not easy to get into that meaningful conversation. And I'm excited at the thought that in these breakout rooms afterwards, you can get that flow going. But you showed us how to do it. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm sorry, which chapters again did you say?
Thank you, Dina. 11 through 16.
11 through 16. Okay.
Lots of examples.
Great. So we can really build the skill set, practice it, apply it. It's what HI is all about. Appreciate so much. your joining us this evening. And Ron, this is your second time at High. We'll have to think about what you're going to do.
I'm honored.
Third time. What is it? 3 times is the charm. So I'm sure we'll be seeing you again down the road. And now, again, on the topic of the subconscious, of the high self, I am absolutely delighted to hand the mic over to Rob Staffen, who is going to be introducing our next presenter. Rob, many of you know already, he's president of the Clinical Hypnosis Society of New Jersey, a great friend and colleague. He has the privilege of sharing more about our next presenter.
Thank you, Dana. And it really is a privilege. And Ron and Anne and Vanetta, thank you so much for that. It was really delightful to witness. There is a joy in introducing presenters, and that joy is multifaceted. There is the formal presentation, and then there is the personal presentation. So I'm going to do the formal presentation first. And this evening we have Philip Akari, a PhD. Phil has been practicing as a clinical psychologist since 1984. He specializes in clinical hypnosis and indigenous energy medicine practices. He is certified in hypnosis by the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis and is also a past president and approved consultant of ASH and past moderator or chair of the ASH Board of Governors. Dr. Akari is also trained to the advanced level in EMDR, thought field therapy, spiritual response therapy, and Reiki. He has been conducting workshops in hypnosis, indigenous healing practices, muscle testing techniques, and intuitive skill development for physicians, psychologists, social workers, nurses, and other licensed mental health care workers throughout the United States since the early 1990s. He will present on the kinesthesiology response, also known as muscle testing as a form of ideomotor signaling and communicating with the patient's high self. Now, you can see Phil smiling because he heard, as I heard, Dr. Anbar say idiomotor, whereas I say ideomotor. But that's just one of the many running jokes that Phil and I have going between us. I first met Phil at an ASH conference in Jacksonville in 2015. And in the preceding ASH conference, I was talking with the then president of Clinical Hypnosis of New Jersey, Maria Machadero, who said, oh, we've got to get together and start doing training in New Jersey. And a year later, we had done absolutely nothing. And so when the ASH conference was rolling around, I said, oh, Maria, are you going to be at ASH? We can talk about doing training in New Jersey. She said, no, I won't be there, but Phil will be there. And that was the beginning. It was become a delightful friendship and a valued colleague. Phil is, he's a unique individual, and he's a lot of fun to hang out with. And when you appreciate what he has to offer, you are in for a real treat. So without further ado, I introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Philip Akari.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you, Ron. It's always fun to watch you do what you do. And it overlaps so much, and it helps me kind of ferret out the operational definition of the constructs that I find myself utilizing. So again, thank you. I was wondering how I would share with you what I would share with you. And then it was like a duh kind of experience, like, why don't you write down some ideas and then muscle test the accuracy of those ideas? So if I show you, I'll turn my camera down. Here's the armrest of my chair. I place my 4 fingers underneath, my thumb on top. I'll place my index finger under my thumb, and I will hold the proposition in mind. For example, 2 + 2 are 4. And if all the variables that are needed to be accounted for are accounted for, the response is going to be a strong response for something that is truth. For something that is not truth, not even false, but not truth. When you test 2 + 2 are 7, you'll go weak temporarily. The ego will then reconstitute its strength. but you'll have that weakness, and the weakness occurs regardless of my biases about the proposition. So if, say my history teacher in grammar school taught me that the second president of the United States of America was Abraham Lincoln, and that's all I knew. When I would muscle test that at my current age, if I hadn't learned otherwise, I would go weak. So muscle testing, also known as the kinesiology response, a la psychiatrist and metaphysician David R. Hawkins, who published his first publication was his dissertation entitled Power versus Force, explicated the practicalities of how to utilize muscle testing. But long before Hawkins were the characters such as George Goodhart, a chiropractor who back in the early 70s developed applied kinesiology. So he would test the deltoid. He'd stand next to the client in a certain position and press down about 20 pounds of force briskly, calibrate a strong response for the client, and then have the client hold certain substances, sugar, certain medications, to their thymus, right there at their breastbone. And if they stayed strong, that substance was either neutral to the person or positive for the person. They went weak for some reason, it was deleterious to the person's physiology and maybe even psychology. So impressed was psychiatrist John Diamond that he employed Goodhart to teach him. And Diamond published Your Body Doesn't Lie and Energy, Life Energy. And that explicates how to do these processes if you're interested. So from there, I muscle tested. Well, the orientation that you thought you might share with your colleagues is correct. It's in their highest good, it's in your highest good. And I don't even operationally know what that means, but it sounds good. So I do it. All right. If I was with you in person and we were all together, I would ask for a show of hands of how many people understand and utilize regularly muscle testing in their lives. If there is a raising of hands or something like that, maybe I can see, but okay, that's good, that's good. Again, okay. All right. Thank you. Oh, some people know how to raise a hand, like I can see it as a raised hand. That's amazing. Excellent. Okay. All right. Now, I'm employing muscle testing regularly. I employ it. I'll spend, for example, I'll spend, for example, about 10, 15 minutes before I meet a new client, or I'll spend time if I have an intuitive hit that one of my current clients is in a particular mode or stress or challenge. So it's like going into a kind of meditative state. I ask my high self for permission, their high self for permission. And if I get yes through muscle testing, I then ask for the information to come through and I write the information down. And when I meet the individual, in somewhat subtle ways, I'll question things and in a way that I can assess the accuracy and veracity of the information received. So for example, when I'm thinking of a particular client, I'll feel a pain in my left lower rib cage area. And then I muscle test that person has something going on abdominally in that area, and I get yes. So that when I meet them, eventually I can ask them, and we have enough rapport for this to be done properly. I'll ask them, do you have something going on right there? And they'll say, I just made an appointment with my physician because I had something going on there when I awoke in the morning. So I've had 30 years of that kind of experience to ratify and to suggest that the manner in which I conduct the muscle testing is sound for the most part. Our egos can always get in the way. Now, with that said, I consider muscle testing an idiomotor construct, and have taught that since about 1992. As you have your classic idiomotor signaling, and David Cheek told me that I have an automatic yes, which really pissed me off, and I thought, no, I don't. But I do have an automatic yes. You have classic idiomotor signaling, which in itself is a very unique experience. It facilitates dissociation, ratification of the non-conscious processes that Ron speaks of. I didn't move that, a client will say. I didn't do that. And they're absolutely correct. That other part of them did that. Muscle testing, similarly. I'll ask a person, make the statement, I, Ron, want to be happy. And on a conscious level, Ron will, in all probability, show strength. And what I do is I'll use fingers, and with the appropriate client and with their permission, I will calibrate their strong response by pulling on their fingers. I am very cautious and do this very differently with people who have been physically abused. So just keep that in mind. When I ask the part of Ron who has this blank problem, do you want to be happy? Oftentimes it will go weak, which is mind-blowing and gratifying for the client. Now, I utilize constructs as the following. We're speaking to any variety of entities, for lack of a better word. High self, in the years I've been doing this, is the part of the person that, in the terminology that's developed over the years, is their divine self, which is untouched by trauma. It's their pure self. It has the information that Ron said he uses from the subconscious mind to guide the therapy. I consider the high self the expert on the individual. You and I, as clinicians, may be expert about hunches, clinical tools, triage of the application of those tools to triage of which problem, first, second, or third. But it's the high self who tells me and them what to do. There is the construct of the soul, and I offer this just for your consideration, and I would love your feedback and your ideas yourselves. Is the soul is the part of us that gets traumatized. In addition to that, I hold that the soul has more than just one lifetime, hence Brian Weiss, Roger Wolger, et al., who do past life regression therapy. Leslie Leckrone, David Cheek, who was tutored by Leslie Leckrone, came to one of the 7 common causes of, in particular, psychophysiologic problems, which is past experience. Leslie and David discovered spontaneously that people were talking about experiences that were other lifetimes. So the soul that was in a human form and burned at the stake was traumatized, as an example. That may manifest itself as asthma and or ichthyosis in this current lifetime, or chronic neck pain and migraine headaches as a decapitation, or almost near hemorrhaging cycles for a woman who was who experienced death by sword to the abdomen while pregnant. So just the knowledge of these experiences sometimes is sufficient for the cure. So there's the high self untouched, the soul touched. And then for those of you who have read Carolyn Mace, I'm blocking on the title. She describes a Navajo who was a code talker who was tortured in Germany. And as he left his body, there was the presence of a Russian pianist that stepped into his body. And then as he recovered, there were two other consciousnesses that visited his body. So when he passed away at 56 years old, David Chetlehay Paladin, his wife said, I lost 4 friends, my husband, the pianist, and the 2 others. So when Ron does some of the work he does, I'm wondering who's talking here? And I spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that we keep clean and clear of any quote unquote nefarious energies that may come through. So in the indigenous medicine practice, I'll open up sacred space. I'll open up my 8th chakra, cover them, cover myself as an added form of protection, and then always muscle test, as Ron aptly says, for permission to test the hypotheses that Dr. Icaria wishes to test. And they'll test strong, even though the conscious mind of the client has no idea what I want to test. And then, of course, I'll share with them operationally what I was testing. So there's a powerful spiritual component to this, to my process. Not only from my own religious practices, but stamped with the practices of the indigenous peoples worldwide. And I also pay attention to the phenomenology of people with whom I work. There are some who do not abide any of these constructs. Hence, we will speak of the wise inner advisor, the wisdom of the inner mind, the unconscious mind, and then I'll talk biologically and research data about how your conscious mind perceives about 10% of data, your unconscious mind perceives 90% of data, and then demonstrate that to them with muscle testing to assess that there are parts to themselves or another part to themselves that has the problem. Whereas the person who refers to me, I, will test strong, like, yeah, I want to be happy. Yeah, this problem is only a 2 on a SUD scale of 10. Whereas the part that has the problem, whoever and whatever that is, will test 8.5. And I have learned that I have to prepare them for that possibility. So I muscle test that according to their high self, they can accept and be enhanced by that kind of information. So I'm not the expert. Their high self is the expert. And sometimes I'm not even the expert about myself. My high self is the expert about me. And it guided me to share this with you. That could be one hell of a cop-out if you ever ask me. So if you're familiar with muscle testing and you utilize it and do self-muscle testing, you can test information about someone else or other propositions about others and phenomena that are quote unquote outside of you, from the present to the past. And Ron mentioned in particular future hypotheses that are challenging, and most, like Hawkins, will say, don't do that. But we know from our Judeo-Christian practices that the Old Testament is replete with prophets. So we know that some know the future, but I tend to keep that out of the context of my practice. So for those of you who do utilize muscle testing or a variation of ideomotor signaling known as Chevreul's pendulum, if you use pendulum, you can utilize that, and you can instruct your client how to utilize the pendulum. Paul Schenk is famous for utilizing his grandfather's gold pocket watch and has his clients use it and watches them get yeses and nos. And Leckrone and Cheek say, yeah, avoid the no answer, just go with the I don't want to answer yet. So you might utilize muscle testing in the processes that Ron is inviting you to use. Thank you, guys.
Oh, boy, Phil, just to hear you describe muscle testing as a way to communicate with the client's high self on the heels of Ron's presentation. What a treat this has been for us this evening. It makes me want to see how you do it, how you appeal to their high self as the expert. And my hunch is you're presenting on this too, possibly at ASH in March, or I don't know. If we want to see you demonstrate this, how do we sign in?
Yeah, Paul Schenk and I are presenting. The title is an extended version and application of Leslie Leckrone and David Cheek's past experiences. We're really doing past life work. So we'll do that for 3 hours. I forget which day. It might be during Ron Anbar's presentation. I don't know.
Please, no. We'll have to write to the program committee before they send it all out, you know.
But they're videotaping all of it, so you get to see all of it.
I think it's Thursday afternoon, if I'm remembering right.
Well, I hope you're right, because I want to watch Ron.
Yeah, we all want to see both of you, and we can really, you know, get to that next level of understanding how to engage the high self, the subconscious in conversations. And tonight was just the appetizer. So thank you so much, Ron. Thank you, Phil, for generously sharing your time and expertise to present these just very intriguing, fascinating topics, hypnotic ways to communicate effectively with our subconscious and high selves. And Ron, appreciate your setting the stage, and also we can integrate some of Phil's stuff into to our breakout room exercise. That will help us continue this learning and get a little taste of it ourselves, how to apply it in practice.